Product provided by Nintendo, specifically Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. The era of the Nintendo Switch 2 is rapidly approaching us, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3 just got an update. Let's talk about it, let's get into it. Hello everyone, I am Jmulls, and according to the Nintendo support website, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has a new update, version 2.2.1, released June 3rd, 2025. And the actual patch notes here are rather vague and also short. They only read, several adjustments have been made to improve gameplay on Nintendo Switch 2. That tells us basically nothing. It's an interesting patch note because a lot of people, myself included, are waiting with bated breath for the possibility of a patch to utilize the better hardware of the Nintendo Switch 2, so that the Xenoblade games as a series, because they're all on the Switch now, can run at say 60 FPS, let alone maybe even 120, or at higher resolutions. But we haven't gotten any information about that. The most we got was that supposed leak that there is a hidden setting for Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition that enables 60 FPS. But in terms of actual official word on the subject, both Monolith and Nintendo have been rather quiet, at least from what I've seen. And considering for a lot of other games, albeit more popular series in terms of overall sales figures, but for a lot of the other games, advertising that, hey, this game that existed on the Switch, well, on the Switch 2, it's going to run at 60 FPS. That's one of the big selling points Nintendo is running with for the Switch 2. And I'm glad they are embracing that because 60 FPS is better, objectively. So to me, if Xenoblade Chronicles, one of their main RPG series, well, if those games were going to have a 60 FPS patch for the Switch 2, at least soon, you would imagine they would just come out and say it instead of being vague and saying several adjustments have been made to improve gameplay on Nintendo Switch 2, because that could mean anything. It's super vague, like maybe it's talking about the new Pro controller for the Switch 2 with the buttons on the back. Maybe it's just talking about, hey, this game's going to, just function on the Switch 2. The wording here is very vague, and personally, I would be more in favor of more specific patch notes that tell us exactly the specific changes that were made. Whether or not it's a balance update, whether or not numbers were tinkered, what is actually here with this update. And I want to use this topic as a way to segue over to talk about just kind of the radio silence Xenoblade Chronicles has had when it comes to the Switch 2 so far. Because even before they actually announced Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, my leading theory was that they were going to make that game and have it be a launch title for the Switch 2, because it made a lot of sense to me. Sure, Xenoblade Chronicles isn't one of their heavy hitters when it comes to actual sales figures, but it is one of their most pretty looking games because the art style and the optimization Monolith is able to do is so legendary that to me it would have been a great way to advertise just how good games can look on the Switch 2, or even how good games can run. You take this game from the Wii U, you give it better resolution and also a higher frame rate, while also having a big RPG ready for that launch window. Now, we'll never know why that didn't actually pan out to be the case. Maybe the Switch 2 just got delayed, maybe they just never actually intended to do that to begin with, but it's not like Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition released like years ago or way down the line. It was only a couple of months ago. So the timing does kind of line up a little bit, and it wouldn't surprise me if Xenoblade Chronicles gets patches for the Switch 2 at some point, but I'm just more surprised at this point, more so than anything, that they haven't talked about it. Like, I get it. As I've said before, Xenoblade isn't one of Nintendo's heaviest of heavy hitters when it comes to sales figures. I get that. I am surprised just by how silent they've been, even in spite of that. I don't think it requires a Herculean effort to at least make like a tweet or a website update about this particular subject. And I would say that I'm concerned that they're not going to even do Switch 2 updates, but making those updates just makes too much sense to me. So like maybe we don't get them immediately and maybe they come down the line, but it's a baffling decision. Maybe the reason we're not getting those updates yet is because Monolith is just swamped right now dealing with whatever else they're working on. We know there can be a big support studio for Nintendo when it comes to some of their other games, let alone working on the next big Xenoblade Chronicles Chronicles game. It's very possible they're just swamped with working on whatever else they're working on instead of going back to these older games and doing whatever back-end stuff is needed to get these games to work and to look better on the Switch too. Just, even if you don't increase the resolution, just a simple patch to make these games run at 60 FPS seems like such an easy layup that I am surprised Nintendo hasn't prioritized that to some degree. I have been kind of baffled by this whole marketing campaign that Nintendo has done for Switch 2 overall, and a lot of the choices they have made, whether that be the launch window, the specific games coming out immediately for it, the price point of certain games and accessories and stuff like that. A lot of the decisions Nintendo have been making for the Switch 2 have been kind of baffling to me. And I don't think all of them just boil down to basic greed. Some of them absolutely, right? Like the price point stuff. But in terms of what IP to focus on in the early days of the Switch 2, that to me is rather baffling. Look, I can get it. I imagine a lot of these studios are extremely busy with the lead up to the Switch 2 and preparing for that launch window of the Switch 2. I would just personally hope, and I would also say that I'm firmly on the side that at some point, I hope we see these more significant patches for the Xenoblade Chronicles series on the Switch 2 that make use of better hardware so these games can run and also look better. 60 FPS patches and higher resolution would go so far for these games, and I personally, at least, would be incentivized to replay these games because they're some of the most gorgeous looking games I've ever had the pleasure of playing. They're some of my favorite games ever, and the chance to play them again at a better frame rate, and also so that they can just flat out look better, because let's be fair here, if you go back to some of those older Xenoblade Chronicles games, or just pretty much any of them, and you zoom in, they can look really pixelated. The one that stands out in my mind is Xenoblade 2, and that's one of my favorite ones. But like, the game is absolutely gorgeous, and then you look at the details more closely, and it's very pixelated. Again, you're working with limitations of the hardware you had available at the time, and I can understand that. What I'm saying, though, is imagine how good it can look when you have access to even better hardware, which is what the Switch 2 is. I think this can reinvigorate a good amount of excitement and just conversation surrounding this IP in the lead up to whatever is next for this IP. I think it's a really easy layup, and it is something that I would like to see. Now, when it concerns Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, there has been some conversation, nothing from official sources, at least to my knowledge, that maybe at some point in the future, we could get entire new DLC for it. I love Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. It's one of my favorite games of all time, and I would need to think about the order, but it's easily top 5 for me. I love that game so much. But if it did get a new update or a new DLC, nothing story focused, right? Just something combat centric, or maybe even a balance update, or maybe some new goodies to play around with in the combat. I think that could go a long way, especially when it comes to getting excited about this new console generation for Nintendo. Because I think it's safe to say that a lot of conversation around the Switch 2 has been rather polarized. You have either a group of people that are really looking forward to it and are really excited because they love Nintendo stuff, right? That's just their jam. There's nothing wrong with that. And you also have another group of people that are really pessimistic about it all, that don't like the price hikes across the board, not just for the price of the Switch 2 itself, but also for the games and the accessories around the Switch 2. I have seen conversation about people not being particularly happy with the perceived power level of the Switch 2. Now, I am not going to a Nintendo console for power gaming. I am predominantly a PC gamer. If I want extremely high frame rates and high resolutions, I'll go there. I just wanted the Switch 2 to be powerful enough to where all the first-party titles that I particularly care about run at a halfway decent frame rate and resolution, which is seemingly what I'm getting out of the Switch 2. I think especially though, when it comes to a new console generation, Nintendo ideally would want as much good PR as they can possibly accrue. And while I don't think Xenoblade running at 60 FPS across the board would be like the smoking gun that doubles the sales figures of the Switch 2 or anything like that, I think it would be an increased value proposition for the Switch 2 that would make quite a few people, myself included, happy and more optimistic and positive about this new console generation instead of going into it feeling like the sound that is created when you have a wet fart. I would say personally this update's a little bit disappointing to me because, well, I would imagine if Xenoblade Chronicles 3 at least, is getting a 60 FPS update in the near future. They would have just said it and probably have advertised it before this point. So to me it seems we're gonna have to wait longer if we're going to get one at all. And if we don't end up getting these updates at any point in the future, I would view that to be wildly disappointing. Because one of the biggest reasons I was looking forward to this new generation of the Switch for the longest time was for Xenoblade, was for this franchise to run at a halfway decent frame rate. I'm here or there when it comes to actual overall graphical fidelity updates. That would be cool, but the 60 FPS patch, or the proposed 60 FPS patch, that was the one I was personally waiting for a lot. Maybe we'll get it some point down the line. Maybe they're saving it for some kind of like weird reveal in the next coming days, who knows? Maybe we don't end up getting it at all, but here's where you come in. I want you to leave a comment down below with, would you be in favor, would you be looking forward to a 60 FPS patch and or a patch that increases the overall resolution and fidelity of the game to make it look better, to look more crisp? Would you like to see that? If not, I'd love to hear your reasons. I mean, I don't judge around here unless it's stupid. Then, you know, little bit of judgment. But would these, like, types of patches make you feel compelled to possibly even play these games again, or to play them for the first time if you haven't dove into them yet? I'd love to hear your thoughts, hear your opinions, and hear your perspectives. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody, until we meet again!